Welcome to the Syneos Health Podcast, Conversations on Commercialization. I'm Tyler Cowan, Vice President at Syneos Health. In this series, we explore the strategies and innovations shaping healthcare today and tomorrow. Let's dive in.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Conversations on Commercialization. I'm extremely excited to have the President and General Manager of Almirall USA, Paul Rittman. Paul, if you wouldn't mind, just give people a quick high-level background of yourself so they can understand your path.
Well, Tyler, it's great to be with you. Thanks to you and Syneos for the opportunity today. As you mentioned, I am the President and General Manager of Almirall's U.S. business. The information I'm going to share today are my own thoughts and opinions, not representing Almirall. I've been in the industry for more than 30 years, started in sales roles, and ultimately for the last 13, 14 years have been in general manager roles in both Canada and the U.S. And I've worked in a lot of different therapeutic areas, but most of the time's been in neurology, oncology, and dermatology.
So, Paul, I want to jump right in where I think is a good place to begin, which is really around, as payers and PBMs become increasingly consolidated, how is that changing the way a specialty company like Almirall, a leader in dermatology, approaches launch planning and patient access specific to dermatology in that specific disease state?
Well, I would say, Tyler, the PBM payer environment is challenging for manufacturers in general, but even more so in dermatology due to the prevalence of generic and compounded treatments and
Sure.
also multiple options for each indication. So considerations of how to best work with the PBMs to create patient access is critically important when you're thinking about your brand and making sure that you're able to help as many patients as possible. In regards to launching, you really, as you know, you only get one opportunity to launch a new product. So getting your strategy right with the PBMs from the get-go is critical. As all of us know, once you set rebates, they never go down.
Right. Of course. No one likes to pay more, right?
Exactly.
I've been fortunate enough to launch a number of products as well. And it's so interesting that outside of just the clinical efficacy of the product, who the patients are, where this is going and how this needs to be used, the PBMs are a consideration that has to be included even in your preliminary planning for launch because it does impact your trajectory, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. The thing with most dermatology products is they go through retail pharmacy, and that's the point of interaction with the payers. And so you need to do everything you can ahead of that point to make sure that there's access for the patient so that the prescription will actually be filled.
Absolutely. And there's quite a few, those retail pharmacies are everywhere, literally. So it's, lots of different flagship providers, but there's also lots of independents. And I'm sure that all of that adds some complexity to it even more.
You bet.
So do you see the payer U.S. landscape having the potential to impact your influence over commercial strategy? So we bumped up a little bit against that perhaps in the previous question, but how can the PBM and what you expect for access, whether that be tiered, whether there be delays impacting your total commercial strategy?
Yeah, I definitely see that the payer landscape impacting strategy and even influencing what products to develop or how you develop them in terms of study designs. For sure, that has to be taken into account, and we do in discussions regarding products that are being developed. Some of the key questions that we think of, and these are basic, but first and foremost, what is your product bringing that's unique that maybe isn't in the market today? And then, do you have the data to support that uniqueness to reinforce it? And of course, that's what you're going to be presenting to PBMs and payers to try and establish the relationship so that patients have access to it. I know it sounds obvious also, but meeting an unmet need with an effective and safe drug is really the starting point. And the more differentiation you have, that's the starting point for the negotiation. So it's an interplay of those variables along with the PBMs and the GPOs for the PBMs that directly or definitely influence drug development and commercial strategy, in my experience.
That's fascinating. Thank you for articulating that in the way you did. It's so interesting how a payer can actually impact, as you said earlier, even what products we consider bringing to market. And then obviously the difference between perhaps a clear, clinically obvious and having the data, as you suggested, around an unmet need versus something that perhaps we would use the term within pharma as a me too, and how that may impact how you bring a product to market, if you do at all.
Absolutely. I've had the pleasure of working with some really good market access people, and they're excellent at understanding the perspective of the payer. And put yourself in the payer's shoes. What are they trying to do? They're trying to affect a lower cost of care, but still quality. And
Right.
so when you look at it that way, then that puts the onus on the manufacturer to really develop drugs that meet unmet needs that are unique and to have that data to support your case. And when all of that comes together, it's a little bit easier, but still difficult.
Dermatology is a little different, of course, than something like a rare orphan disease when we're talking about coming to market, because we're talking about broader, larger indications that do affect many, many patients. However, there are generic considerations, and I guess that clinical data becomes increasingly important to be able to reinforce and be obvious with the PBMs as why they want to cover it.
Absolutely. And there is a difference between broad disease states like acne or psoriasis or eczema, atopic dermatitis versus, some rare derm diseases like hidradenitis suppurativa or the bullous diseases where there's more unmet need. And so the payers are going to take a different approach there, and thus the manufacturers take a different approach there as well in choosing to try and innovate to help more patients where there's maybe not other treatments or few versus more crowded spaces where it's the differentiation is less so. And that sets up the dynamic for your interactions with the payers and their views and how easy it is to put an access agreement in place or how difficult it is.
And I'm sure people listening to this will appreciate the as the kids would say, the shout out to good market access people, because I think that is an incredibly important part of development of that strategy. So I think that is something that could get missed as marketers and companies start to plan is, who do I have from a market access perspective? How are they informing the unmet need in the discussion with the payer? So that's really important, I think, to know as people who are listening to this think about their strategy as they approach launch.
I would reinforce that point, Tyler, because like I said earlier, you really only get one chance to launch. And from a marketing standpoint, you could reposition a product or you could bring new data. But from a market access standpoint, when you put rebate agreements in place with payers, if you've started down the wrong path, it's pretty near impossible to fix that. And so it's really important that you've got good market access people that are strong in strategy and experience and also have built relationships with the PBMs and the GPOs and even down to some regional payers. So definitely double tap on that multiple times.
In the world of AI, people very quickly forget that relationships are incredibly important. And I'm going to use that relationship as a pivot point. I wanted to talk to you around digital omni-channel engagement, what that looks like. I'm old enough to remember when there weren't as many digital options, and having the GM at the time, Bear, where I worked many years ago, come down to my office and say, "What's inside sales? And please explain to me what this is." So dermatology sort of historically has relied on personal relationships between reps, prescribers, patients, and as we just talked about a moment ago, the PBMs themselves. So does that still remain the case today, or how has that changed? And if so, how has that dynamic changed? Just, what's your view on those relationships and those personal relationships?
I'm also old enough to remember when it was all just about the sales representatives and there wasn't much else surrounding them. But certainly, you're never going to get away from the importance of personal promotion. But the beauty of where we are now is you can wrap digital elements around that and create tremendous synergy in getting your brand in front of clinicians of all types. And so we're seeing that in dermatology. You can't turn the TV on without seeing a direct to
Sure.
consumer advertisement for a product for psoriasis or for atopic dermatitis these days. And then you'll see some of the same brands in the arthritis field or the ulcerative colitis or Crohn's field too. So
Absolutely.
really get a lot of big doses in the US of DTC. But you're also seeing big growth of direct to patient coupled with telehealth.
Okay.
And I can give you an example in the acne space. We've seen a proliferation of startup companies, some backed by physicians, that are DTP and telehealth designed to facilitate getting patients on the right regimen of treatments for their acne and in a way that is more convenient for the patient. The patient doesn't have to go into an office, doesn't have to wait to schedule it. They can click a couple of links on their computer, answer some screening questions, be connected with a physician who will assess them, look at their acne. And I think it's easier with acne because it's fairly obvious what's mild, moderate, or severe
Sure.
visually. And so we've seen just a huge proliferation there with some brands and even with some generics. So I think we'll continue to see the growth of digital approaches, DTP, telehealth, that sort of thing, but always coupled with some manpower and more of the traditional as well.
One specialist that seemed to be the most difficult, or let's say by difficult, I mean time to get to, was an actual dermatologist. Actually getting to a dermatologist seems quite challenging in the United States.
Yeah, it definitely can take time. There have been busy practices and that sort of thing. And even with allied health professionals, PAs and NPs,
Sure.
it still takes quite a bit of time to get in to see them. Thus, we've seen really good adoption of telehealth access. And I won't mention any names, but there are multiple companies in that space, and they've all now offered things for acne because they see it, I think, as a great opportunity that could be penetrated pretty quickly.
As we talk about the difference between field as we're talking about promotion, and then we've got these online direct to patient platforms and telehealth, how do digital tools fit into this? So how does digital tools being successfully leveraged within, let's stick with face to face, how important is that now with a representative being sort of digitally equipped to have a conversation with a physician or with, as you said, allied health professionals directly in their office face to face?
Face to face is still critically important because it's memorable and it allows a good interaction kind of back and forth. It's not
Sure.
just one way, but the digital tools, what we've seen both at Almirall and in previous positions, is we've seen wonderful synergy with the digital tools. So even, some of them are follow-up items for the sales representatives to extend their call with the physicians. And moving away from the sales representatives, we've seen pharmacy move into the digital space as well. And you've
Huh.
probably experienced it. I have as well. Whichever pharmacy you choose to use, once they get your information, we all get text messages now. Hey, this prescription is due for a refill. And it's like, wow, I didn't ask them to do that, or I didn't realize I asked them to do that. But you find those helpful to keep you on schedule with medications. So I think we're seeing a great proliferation of digital tools across the healthcare spectrum. And it's almost a menu that you can choose from for your brand. Do you want more digital interaction to add on top of your sales reps interaction with HCPs? Do you want to engage retail pharmacy and create some push for refills? And what's your continuum of digital activity for the brand across multiple fronts?
It's interesting. I use Walgreens. They are not afraid to text me, I would say. And I'm sure that I ladder up to some sort of specific persona where I do respond to texts. So it works. It's effective. I go, oh, yeah, right. I've got to go pick up my medication. I've got to go pick up my monthly prescriptions. I had a conversation a couple of weeks back around the GLP-1s, specifically around obesity and that entire disease state. And we've touched on these direct to patient platforms, digital innovations, and they're not afraid to advertise to me on TV. But it sounds like oncology was there as well, and dermatology is getting into considerable investments in DTC. But again, that can be incredibly expensive. How big is DTC for the dermatology space broadly?
I think of direct to consumer as very broad, like the TV ads that you're seeing for eczema brands or psoriasis brands. You're trying to reach a very large audience. DTP is more targeted. You've gotten information that based on the people's profile, they may have XY disease, whatever it's acne or AK or something like that. And so you target them. But the reality is DTC has grown tremendously, so much so that now it's back on the radar of the FDA.
It is.
As you may know, they've sent a lot of letters out trying to discourage DTC or at least rein it in where they think they're seeing some abuses. And the interesting thing about that is they seem to be changing the rules, and what was understood to be okay previously is now they're kind of intimating that maybe that's not okay. So that's you've got kind of those push and pull there, where tension there, where on the one hand DTC is effective for brands, DTP is effective for brands, especially when combined with telehealth, but it's in some ways being discouraged. So we'll have to see how that plays out. In the meantime, because it's so effective, I think large brands in prevalent disease areas, I think you'll continue to see it being important.
When we were at the Fierce Pharma event in Philadelphia recently, that's when the FDA came out with their new discussion points around really what they consider to be perhaps a lack of balance, a lack of fair balance around what's being provided to patients as some of the, let's call it, downside risks, and making sure that they articulate what some of the side effects can be to some of these medications. And of course, depending on the biologic, which, largely the DTPs are pretty strong in there are some serious considerations, which again, and we're talking about AK or atopic dermatitis, the side effect profiles are much different and obviously milder, but it's interesting to be cognizant of making sure that things are balanced when you're talking to patients and not just giving all the good side and not talking about what some of the downside risks are.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, a couple of things, what the government has said publicly, they seem to also have concerns not only about pharmaceutical manufacturers, but also about telehealth companies and compounding pharmacy and all of that. So it's a broad approach to try and rein in what they see as maybe some things that have gone too far. I think the underlying principle, though, why do companies do DTC or DTP? It's that surveys show that healthcare practitioners will take into account a patient's request for a specific brand. They may decide it's
Sure.
not the right one, but there's influence there if the patient says, I want brand X versus brand Y.
Yeah, and as long as that's a sound medical decision, that makes sense. When we talk about consumerization and brand mindset, I'll use a personal example. I have teenagers heading into that time period where acne is a very real thing for them. Dermatology is uniquely within this area where you've got more significant diseases that require prescriptions, but also some consumer wellness considerations around just skin health and vanity. How do you think brands connect clinically and emotionally with patients, considering that the intersection here?
Dermatology is really interesting, and you really see a wide continuum in dermatology, from rare orphan derm diseases to more common medical diseases, all the way over to aesthetic
Sure.
treatments. And then you see modalities from topicals to systemics to physician administered medications or even procedures. So it's really quite diverse. And so, first, where is your product going to play? And what are the dynamics in that part of the dermatology market? Is it more prescription or is it more cash pay physician procedures on the aesthetic side? So
Right.
you kind of make those judgments, and sometimes the lines can be a little bit blurred on the edges. But I think ultimately the approach for a specific brand is driven by the specific disease state and the modality of treatment and what the patients are looking for. So those things all come into play in how you decide to go to market and what tactics you want to use.
I love what you said there about making sure that the parent is included, because ultimately, when they want something specific that perhaps is a cash pay, they're coming to me. They're coming to dad to pay for it. So I need to understand what this is, how this works, what this is for, how that's going to benefit them. Certainly, allowance is my $20 pittance that I give them a week to help with the chores, which I have to nag them about, probably will not suffice to pay these sort of things. If you look ahead 2 years or 3 years, What elements do you think are going to help define successful commercialization in specialty areas like dermatology?
So I think there's some basic goals that remain the same, even as the tools and the approaches evolve. And first and foremost, it's really going to always be about innovation. What can you do better to meet unmet needs for the patient? What's a more effective treatment for X disease, where maybe there aren't treatments or there are, but this is better? Innovation, meeting unmet needs, something that's safe and effective, better than what was before. I worked for many years in oncology and hematology, and that's the basis of development there. And I think that's being applied more and more to other disease areas like dermatology. And that's to the benefit of the patients and the physicians who treat them. It's something that's better, more effective, or safer, that sort of thing. But I think then it's about, okay, if you've innovated and you've got a really good, safe, effective new product, how do you most effectively and efficiently, one, educate the HCPs, and two, navigate the access, payer access, and or what we're seeing now, going more directly to the patient
Mm-hmm.
with cash offerings and that sort of thing. I think we're going to see those things grow. Those doors have been open now. I think you're going to see a growth of the cash offerings and maybe patients either not using their insurance, or if they don't have insurance, using the cash pays. You've seen the agreements between several pharma and the Trump administration. So I think that's going to continue to grow even as we see evolution of the tools on how to reach patients as well.
I love that. And as we wrap up here, one of the things that's come through loud and clear from you is the importance of the patient. And that's ultimately what we're treating. That's why we're in this business. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely, Tyler. It's been great to talk with you. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts today and look forward to future opportunities as well.
That's a wrap on this episode of Conversations on Commercialization. Catch the rest of the series and subscribe to the Syneos Health Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you have other topics you would like to hear from us about, send a message to podcasts@syneoshealth.com. For more future-focused, actionable life science insights, visit Syneos Health Insights Hub at insightshub.health.